Disorderly conduct is covered in Section 42.01 of the Texas Penal Code. And while there are 11 different subsections or behaviors in which the offense can be committed, today we're just going to look at the first two. A person commits an offense if he intentionally or knowingly, 1. Uses abusive, indecent, profane, or vulgar language in a public place, and the language by its very utterance tends to incite an immediate breach of the peace. 2. Makes an offensive gesture or display in a public place, and the gesture or display tends to incite an immediate breach of the peace. So one of the interesting conflicts that we come in with this offense is the constitutional protection or freedom of speech provided in the First Amendment. Most of the other language offenses that we've seen up to this point involve threatening other people, and this is a little different. They don't always have to be threats, but they do have to incite an immediate breach of the peace. So we're limiting what we can criminalize, whether it be vulgar or otherwise, to what we refer to as fighting words. Fighting words are those words by their very utterance inflict injury or tend to incite an immediate breach of the peace. And you'll notice in both of those subsections that incite immediate breach of the peace is a required element. So it can't just be vulgar language. It has to be vulgar language that tends to incite an immediate breach of the peace. So to get to fighting words, we're going to look at a few characteristics that are typically going to be required before we'll define speech as fighting words, which can be criminalized under these subsections. The words generally have to constitute a personal insult, and they have to be directed at an individual rather than a group of people. They can't be generalized insults directed at groups of people. They have to be specifically addressed face-to-face to another person. The words, by their nature, have to provoke the average person, the average citizen, with an amount of anger or rage to produce a violent response. If the average person would just shake off the words or the speech, they're typically not going to be considered fighting words. Did the words actually produce a violent response in the circumstances? That may be something that we need to look at. That's not a required element necessarily. There's an example from Texas in which a high school student, as he walks across the stage at graduation, raises his middle finger, flips the audience, the middle finger, and the principal or the assistant principal, one or the other, testified that he had to restrain this animalistic urge to retaliate against this kid, and that's typically what we're looking for. An average person has a violent emotional outburst or response to the speech or to the gesture. But it doesn't necessarily have to be violence or anything along those lines. It could be upsetting. There's an example in Texas. The U.S. Supreme Court failed to consider or refused to consider a Texas woman's appeal in which she was claiming a 14th Amendment equal protection argument because she was arrested for the offensive gesture subsection for exposing her breast in public. She attended a beach festival topless, and her mere presence upset a large portion of the attendees. So we would consider that tending to incite an immediate breach of the peace, even though violence doesn't necessarily take place. A couple of other examples, language and how they are used. We don't have a list of fighting words, so if a group of friends or brothers, relatives are throwing insults at each other, but it's generally considered to be in jest, it's not fighting words based on the circumstances of that given scenario. But you change the scenario, you add a stranger, you add a face-to-face confrontation, let's say after a traffic accident, they very well may be fighting words under those circumstances. So we'll keep that in mind. A lot of the lower courts are in conflict with what consistently is a fighting word, what is not a fighting word. So it's something that we have to look at as far as a case-by-case scenario or a case-by-case basis when those prosecutions take place.